Hello everyone, I'm Chase. Welcome back to the middle of nowhere. That is the 2023 Ford Bronco Sport Heritage Edition, and this is the Overrun. Now, let's get down to brass tacks. This is the Bronco Sport Heritage Edition, which, if you go on Ford's website, sits kind of in the middle of the lineup, at least as far as things are positioned on the webpage. In reality, what this is kind of a way into the top of the Bronco Sport lineup. And I'll get to why that's a little bit of a problem later. For right now, what I want to talk about is how this car is optioned, because it has just a couple things on it that I think are really worth talking about. Let's start with the optional extras. There is only one. It is $150, and it is the cargo management system. It is extremely useful. It creates a little shelf for you to put gear in through the window pass-through, and you can pull it out and use it as a little table. There are also, and these are standard, little work light thingy-madoos up there so that you can do whatever it is you need to do in the back of your rugged off-roader. Now, speaking of, the Heritage Edition loads you up with a lot of the off-road goodies you would normally have to climb the trim ladder a little bit higher to get. That means things like the lifted suspension, the nice big off-road wheels, tires, and most importantly, all of these cool retro touches that you see on the side of the car. There's also standard four-wheel drive, which is arguably the most important, and I don't know why I didn't start with that, but that's okay. Now let's talk money. The Heritage Edition gets you a lot of cool little upgrades, as we talked about, but it also requires you to spend a little bit more money. This one, as spec'd with our little cargo management system, delivery, etc., comes out to $46,400. That's actually pretty reasonable, as the Subaru Outback Wilderness, one of this car's biggest competitors, is very competitively priced. Now, the Outback that I built on Subaru's configurator while doing research for this video comes out to about $45, which obviously is rather close. They're within $1,400 of each other. Now, there is a bigger problem that we are going to get to in regards to this car's Bronco Ness. Now, the Bronco I built is a lot better equipped than this Bronco Sport, or at the very least, it's very similarly equipped. I spent money on two things, not including the eruption green metallic paint, which mercifully is standard because I love that color. I went for the 2-liter engine, just like this one. Now, that's the only way to get a manual in the Bronco, and the reason I did that is because, frankly, I just don't think that there will be a stick-shift Bronco around for much longer, and if you're asking me, an enthusiast who occasionally off-roads, that's just what I would rather have that. I think that it is a more unique experience, and while the Heritage Edition stuff is very cool, I would just rather have the big Bronco with the 32-inch tires, the extra ground clearance, the four-wheel drive system, etc., etc. Now, the big difference is I got the mid group, and that gets you nicer interior trimmings on the full-size Bronco. It also gets you heated front seats, I believe also a heated steering wheel, and that runs you $1,645, which brings me to that MSRP I mentioned earlier, which again is $45,305. Now, let's also talk about the Subaru Outback Wilderness that I built, because I also went on to their configurator and built one to see how it stacks up against this. Now, obviously, the big advantage that this has is full-time, real deal, four-wheel drive. Well, it's not full-time. You can kind of do the torque splitty thing, which we'll get to when we talk about fuel economy, because that's very important. But for now, Outback. I built mine, and it would cost me $43,164. So that's obviously roughly $3,000 short of the Bronco Heritage as it sits right here in front of us. I also got a couple of options because Subaru makes you pay for quite a lot of that stuff. I got the cargo sidewall protector for $99, which I did to mimic the cargo protector in there. I got the rear seat back protector, again, just to mimic that. That's $155. My most expensive options were the door sill step guards and the cool Wilderness mud flaps. Now that I look at it, this doesn't really have mud flaps either, so point Subaru. Other than that, though, I also got the wireless charger, which is $347 in the Subaru. Absolutely ridiculous money for a wireless charger. I think that it's probably not worth it because all they do is make your phone hot, but it is what it is. Now, with that in mind, let's talk about the interior of this Bronco Sport Heritage, because there are some very cool things in there that are tied into the Heritage pack. All right, now let's talk interior. And before I do, I did just want to very quickly mention the aesthetic things that you get with the Heritage package that I totally forgot about when I was shooting the exterior segment, and that is the yellow paint that you saw. It's also the white wheels. There are a couple of other color choices that I can't remember off the top of my head for the body paint, and then you get that very cool white front fascia with the red Bronco lettering, and then you also get those really cool Bronco Sport badges that are on the side of the car. Now, let's talk interior. In here, there are also some Heritage-specific things. This pleather material with the nice little Bronco embossed on it, and this pseudo-plaid look seating inserts. Those are cool. I kind of just wish they were fabric, though. I think it would be a lot cooler. Now, aside from that, the rest of this interior is very much standard Bronco Sport, which kind of varies because this is now down towards the economy car side of things. There's quite a lot of just hard and generally scratchy plastics everywhere, which is fine because they're very easy to wash and very easy to clean. There's very good storage in here as well. There's a little cubby under the infotainment center. There's another one for a wireless charger, which in this car there is. There's also a little net on the passenger side, footwell on the transmission tunnel that I appreciate a lot because I don't often charge my phone wirelessly. I find that my phone ends up getting too hot. A lot of the time it just doesn't add to the phone's state of charge. So I think that the whole wireless CarPlay, wireless charging thing is really just a good way to heat your phone up. In light of that, it's great because you can run your little cable down to the storage pocket on the side and have your phone somewhere else. And generally speaking, that helps keep my phone cooler. I can run my phone mirroring software better, etc., etc. Now, let's talk infotainment. This is a pretty good system. It's Ford Sync. It works really well. It's very responsive. I have a great level of customization between the center screen, which I believe is about 8-ish inches, and the other 4-ish inch or 5-inch digital screen in the middle. We have 2 analog dials for your rev counter and your wheel speed, and then you can kind of toggle through all of the menus. Other material quality notes, I don't really have any. This is a very nice interior. Everything feels relatively good, especially at this price point. This is kind of what I am expecting in not only the big Bronco, but also the Outback Sport that we talked about. Or, I'm sorry, Outback Wilderness. I'm gonna keep doing that. I don't know why. I'm sorry. Now, I do have some complaints about the interior. First of all, and it's really my biggest and only complaint, there is absolutely zero support in these seats. They're very cushy and comfortable and wide, but when you drive the car off-road, the lack of bolstering creates a problem because you're just flopping about everywhere, and it feels a lot like you're sitting on a horse. It's very funny because this is called the Bronco, but it's also kind of annoying. I'm also, while I'm cruising on the highway, constantly looking for somewhere to like rest my legs because there's no thigh support. So the trade-off is you ratchet the seat all the way up so that your legs sit more on the cushion than on the floor. And the result of that is you lose a little bit of circulation in your legs. I think that it's just not the greatest seating position in the world. Thankfully, the seats are very comfortable and it makes up for that. And of course, this is all entirely preferential. Now, with the interior out of the way, let's go talk about how the Bronco Sport performs not only on the road, but off it as well. All right, driving the Bronco Sport. We are, if you can't tell, not on a paved road. I'm doing some very light off-roading in here, and that is going to help me kind of get a feel for what this is like. Now, I've driven this for a little while off-road, and like I said earlier, the four-wheel drive is really a differentiating factor in this segment. The competition is largely all-wheel drive. Now, Ford was able to kind of grandfather that in, I think, because of some platform sharing with the larger Bronco and some other models. Now, good for them, right? That's the big differentiating factor. And I like driving this thing off-road. It even has some camera support that you kind of wouldn't really expect in other vehicles of this price point. For example, I'm looking at the front camera feed right now. It's a little annoying that you can't use that for parking, but that's not really related to this car's ability to drive off-road, so we're gonna skip it for right now. Other off-road driving notes. As I talked about with the seats, it's really annoying. As you can tell, I'm driving slowly, but as you can tell, you kind of tend to get thrown around a little bit in these seats, especially as you kind of like pick up the pace, just because of the fact that they don't have a ton of bolstering. I don't like that. I'm constantly, as I'm driving off-road especially, banging my knees around down here on the door and the transmission tunnel, and that's not super fun. I actually was driving up here and was a little bit sore on my left knee. I did some backpacking this weekend, so maybe that's also part of it, but the lack of lateral support in these seats is really frustrating. That said, the ride off-road is largely comfortable and helps to make up for that a lot. I could sit in this thing and off-road it all day. I think that my hip flexors and adductors would be just a little bit tired at the end of the day from keeping my legs straight, but other than that, it's fine. The steering feedback while I'm off-road is great, and as we talked about a little bit earlier, a lot of the off-road drive modes are very, very helpful. I've got it in the mud and ruts mode right now because the road is obviously very rutted and bumpy, and there are other low traction modes. There's also a low traction launch function, and there is this handy hill descent function that a lot of other off-road-ish SUV, CUV competitors are now starting to bring to the table as well. I like it a lot. It's very useful, especially when you don't have enough lateral support and you're constantly moving your legs around to keep them comfortable. Other than that, man, like, this is a very easy car to drive off-road. I feel like I have clearance for the majority of trails. I have had the occasional little crackle pop on the undercarriage from some larger rocks, and you definitely have to be mindful of your clearances in this car. Luckily, some of the owner's manual material points out the clearances of this car, and you can kind of eyeball them as you go down the road. It's not too bad. And the tires are very, very serious, so you have a lot of grip too if it does get a little bit hairy. I wouldn't hesitate to take this on the majority of trails. There is that upper 30% of trails, let's say, where I would want the big boy Bronco. And because of the way that the two lineups kind of intersect, I would be able to get a big boy Bronco again, assuming I could get one at MSRP. Now, with that in mind, let's go ahead and get on the road where it's a little bit less bumpy and talk about how this thing behaves the rest of the time. Pretty fast. It did also just deny me a downshift, so there is that. But I mean, it does a pretty good job for the most part. It feels really, really quick. As you noticed, you can also hear a ton of gear sliding around in the back, so that's kind of a negative for the cargo management system. If you have stuff up at that glass level, I guess it slides around a lot, which is kind of annoying. The other kind of annoying thing while we're complaining is the fuel economy. Ford says that it will do 23 combined. I have hit 23.4 over my week or so of driving, and I have covered roughly, exactly 300 miles. So the fuel economy is kind of but that's also kind of where you end up with vehicles in this segment, so I'm not really going to count it against the car. Anything else that I might count against the car, I don't love the driving position as I've talked about. I do think that the visibility is pretty good. My biggest issue is the kind of over the shoulder. There is a little quarter window back there, but it is kind of difficult to see while you are maneuvering the car. The turning circle also is not super awesome because of that intelligent four-wheel drive system.
Even when you can tell that everything is going to the front wheels, it is just a little bit big feeling. It also just feels kind of big and tall. It's a larger platform, just like the Outback, just like the Bronco. This feels big. I also just got out of a Mazda Miata, so you'll have to forgive me feeling that it's a little too big, because that is probably the smallest car on sale today, the Miata, not the Bronco, obviously. Other than that, I think it drives quite well. It's very quiet in here. It feels very refined. There's not a ton of noise or vibrations or any undue harshness in the ride. If anything, and I think that this is so that it's more comfortable off-road, the dampers are just a little bit on the soft side, so you get a lot of big roly-poly motions through corners. If you're driving through a narrow canyon back road like this, say on your way to go do some off-roading, like I just did, you're gonna be kind of like rolling around a lot, because there's not a lot of, you know, like bolstering in the seats, and the suspension's very soft. Thankfully, the steering isn't totally dead, which is kind of nice. I can tell which way the wheels are pointed. Doesn't really matter on the road because this is an SUV and no one cares, but it does matter a lot off-road. I can generally kind of get a sense for where the tires are at. I have great sight lines as well, like I've said. It's really a pretty solid driving experience. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I can say that is bad about the way that this drives, and realistically, there isn't. Ford is kind of on a roll right now with this stuff. I like this 2-liter engine a lot. It's also the fastest way into the upgraded 2-liter engine. I cannot remember the power figures off the top of my head. I'll try and cut them in right here somewhere. Let's see if I'm right. I think that this car makes about 250 to 300 horsepower and about the same in pounds-feet of torque. It's mated to a 7 or 8-speed automatic transmission, and it feels okay. Like we saw earlier, this denied me a downshift when I was in sport mode, which is kind of annoying. It has paddles, and they like bring it up consistently in the literature, which is weird because they suck. The transmission is just not, it's not fast. It's an economy transmission. It's there to manage the 4-wheel drive system, and that's it. And that's fine. But like, don't brag about it having paddles and then have it like shift really slow, because it's this very big rubber bandy, like, whoom, shift up through the gears, and the downshifts are just a little bit faster. But again, not super great. Now, back to the engine. I do really, really like this engine. There's a lot of great turbo noises. Listen. I don't know if you could hear it, but there was just the slightest chirp from the turbo. If you let off, you can actually hear the wastegate vent, and you get a little choo, which I think is very funny in a car like this. It amuses me because I have the brain of a 6-year-old and I like turbo noises. That said, it's not unduly loud. Like I said, it's very quiet in here, and the engine doesn't contribute at all to any of the noise. There's this little when you get on it just a little bit, to remind you that you're in the Bronco Sport, because this is sporty for outdoorsy young people who can't afford this car because nobody is paying them enough to buy new cars. That's another discussion. Let's get back to the engine. It's just, it is turbocharged, and as such, it feels inherently turbocharged. The power band, hi dear, there was some whitetail up on the hill. The power band is very rubber bandy. You get this big rush of torque at like 2,000-ish RPM, and it builds until about 5,800 RPM, where it starts to fall off and run out of gas. Speaking of, I'm almost out of gas, so if this video cuts abruptly, it probably means that we've run out of gas. Now, it's a good thing that that's really all I have to say about this thing. It's really, really solid. I like it. I like driving it. It's comfortable. It does everything I need it to do. It's a great little appliance that has some really awesome off-road capability. And with that in mind, let's get back to the outside of the car, wrap this thing up, and I will tell you what to do about the little Bronco versus big Bronco situation, and how that ties into this car's competition. See you there.
So, where does this leave me and the Bronco Sport Heritage Edition? Well, assuming that I couldn't get a brand new Ford Bronco ordered through my dealer, I would probably end up in one of these. That's mostly because if I'm buying one of these, I'm getting it for off-road use, and if I'm getting it for off-road use, that means that I want that four-wheel drive that this offers over the Subaru. Like we talked about in the drive section, that's kind of the game changer off-road. It just gives you a little bit more confidence. Now, if I'm able to scale that up to the big Bronco, I will. But as we know, getting a Bronco in the real world is still a little bit tough. I'm filming this video on August 21st, 2023, and it's still really hard to get a Bronco at MSRP off the lot. Ford has kind of gone to war with its dealers over that, and it hasn't gone too well. They just can't make them fast enough. And in light of that, I think that this is a very solid alternative. It still looks great. It still gives you a lot of that Bronco functionality, just in a slightly smaller, slightly lower package. Obviously, the off-road upgrades that you get with the Heritage Edition or the top trim Black Diamond, I think that's what that's called, gets you part of the way back to Bronco levels, full-grown Bronco levels of off-road capability. Now, that's kind of it, really. That's it. If you can't get a big Bronco, then get one of these, because it's comfortable, it's quiet, given its off-road ability, it gets okay fuel economy, it's got some really great, well-thought-out features, the cargo system, the lights, the storage on the interior. I'm sorry, I'm just getting eaten alive by these flies, and I'm just going to keep going. And there are other things like the little zippered mole pockets on the backs of the seats that are great for storage. And considering the average price of a used car, this is not that much of a premium. Remember, that's about $40,000. This is $46,000. So with that in mind, that is the Ford Bronco Sport Heritage Edition. And as always, thank you so very much for watching. Please, seriously, hit the like button. It really does help, and I know that you hear that a lot. That's because it helps so much. Also, remember to subscribe, and thank you very much for watching. We will see you next time.